The emperor wears no clothes. And tonight I'm thinking about how, for instance, in the latest New Earth video, a short video, she talks about how the mainstream narrative depicts the Etruscans. And, the Etruscans in the mainstream narrative are supposed to predate the Romans. So, everything that's older than the Roman narrative is lumped into the Etruscan era. And Sylvie, very gently mocks, this notion. And, that the advanced people were the Etruscans, and the Romans are more or less the remnants or the, leftover people from the wipeout of the Etruscans. And even the original name that Sylvie says, and how do we know what the original name was? It wasn't Etruscan because it's written. All of these Etruscan artworks are written in a language that the mainstream narrative tells us is impossible to read. And yet, Sylvie states with her Slavic understanding, she can read them like it's nothing. I mean, it's not a mystery. And that's why I'm calling this The Emperor Wears No Clothes. She can read it. And in fact, she shows in her video great examples on how the alphabets are obviously identical. And yet the mainstream narrative tells us, no, we can't read this. And it's very much like the emperor wears no clothes, and, except I think in that story they were fooling the emperor. In this story, they're fooling the masses, It reminds me of Shakespeare taming the shrew. 'Tis day, no, 'tis night. And eventually, the people cave, or in that case, the character caves and says, 'tis night. And so, really fascinating. And it goes even further that not only are the Etruscans the primitive forefathers of the Romans, not only is that ridiculous, where actually the Etruscans are more advanced and the root of the people and the culture, but their original name, which can be found in depicting their artwork and whatever else, basically means the scattered ones. And where were they scattered from? They were scattered from the north. And, she doesn't say this, but it brought me to the idea that the Etruscans, naturally then, which are actually the people from the north, which is actually rooted in Ruski, and it sounded more like, in any case, it brought me to the idea that they could be the Tartarians, or the scattered ones of the Tartarians. And, there was probably a period, because, there seems to be kind of a primitive period of Tartaria. And then I think there was also a more ancient period of Tartaria, where there would have been grand and glorious tech and buildings. And yet what we see on the old maps, I believe, is more of more of the scattered ones, there would, hence, their name. And I encourage you again to watch Sylvie's video. I'm just going to scratch over this, but very, very interesting. I think she did a great job, and continuously hammers this point. Again, it takes me back to the emperor wears no clothes, but in reverse, And so what it, ultimately I could conclude of this is that this Greco-Roman style, and I think naturally what she is getting at, is that it's not the Greco-Roman style. No, not at all. And we call it that, and I call it that because we identify with that. But it is not that. And again, this seems to have its foundations in the northern regions. And I would say not only the northern Russian regions and northern European regions, but also the northern American regions. And we see in these northern regions, especially in the northern Canadian regions, blast marks. If you go on Google Earth, you'll see blast, 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 and complete annihilation. And yet, if you look in the waters, even from Google Earth, we can still see traces of civilization, and similar to what I've shown on past videos, I mean, it's all over the planet, or whatever the realm. And so, really interesting. And another thing I wanted to touch on was Martin's latest work with the technology and the toroidal fields, and really the magnetic fields and the fasces, even though I'm mispronouncing that, I know. But in any case, it leads me to, what Sylvie talks about with the growing of stone. And now I'm thinking, when I look at these amazing buildings that look almost 3D printed, especially in Asia and Cambodia, and these buildings just look perfect. They look as if they have been, 3D printed. And now the idea that you could 3D print a building is completely logical. A lot of things are beginning to make sense with this work that all the researchers are bringing together lately. Really, really fascinating. And I just wanted to conclude with the idea that Martin is bringing up most recently in his videos. The idea that we live, or our plane is sandwiched in between a double toroidal field, if I'm getting this correctly. It appears that we are moving into the direction that this plane is organic. Let me try to re-explain that. When I thought I lived on a ball, it evolved into this greater level, which now I believe was partially true. And I began to experience this ball as alive, as a energetic, being, or something that was alive, something that was more than just a rock, let's just say. And then when I began to see the science, and I'm going to call the truth movement more science than any of the crap that we've gotten force-fed in school or as children. But as I looked at the science, it became absolutely clear that, okay, this is flat. This is flat, but yet there's so much more to that. Where in the realm of the universe or of existence is this flat plane? Are we in a box, or is it floating in space? How could it be? There would have to be space. There can't just be a wall. I mean, there would. So really, the idea brought me back to kind of an artificial construct of our plane, and almost feeling captive or prisoner. And now with this new work, it has actually brought me back to the idea that, again, it is alive and organic. And especially when Martin was showing the toroidal fields and how this same pattern, the four corners and the magnetic fields, and this same pattern is found in everything. I mean, it was in the apple, the tomato, it was in the brain, in the heart, and of course it was in our realm, and we are just a part of this, and yet it exists on a macro and micro cosmic level. And it's really heavy, I'll be honest, it's really heavy, and I believe it to be true. But it doesn't make it easy, and it's just like the flat earth science, it wasn't easy, and I would have rather not believed it, but yet I would always rather have the truth, and yet it takes an adjustment period. Some things can't just be swallowed immediately, they have to be digested. And finally, I want to wrap this video up with a little Google exploring. I feel like I haven't Google explored in a little bit. Based on my recent video on the ancient Americas, where I talked about the 7 noble cities in Salt Lake City that were depicted on the old map, I decided to take a little trip down here. And what I discovered is these really strange, anomalous patterns that look like neighborhoods. Now, of course, people would say that these are military, but from what I can see, actually, they seem accessible from the road, and they don't seem military or quarantined off. They're so absolutely in the middle of nowhere. And now it does look as if, I don't know, there's these bunkers, and maybe there is some military activity. And I've seen the same thing at Area 51, and now it makes me question whether these weren't just here. But what I can tell right away is that whether the bunkers were here or not, we have a lot of old ancient activity here on the ground, and whether somebody's come in and paved, but this is definitely older, and you can see how the vegetation is, it has different coloration than the surrounding area. I mean, it's very, very clear that these are old patterns. And let me see if I can actually find the place that I wanted to show you. I think it was in this little place called Tooele. Tooele isn't far from Salt Lake City. You have Salt Lake City, and then these are called the Ochre Mountains. And then you have this little town here called Tooele. And this is what initially caught my attention. Now, they're supposed to store waste facilities out in Tooele, and I'm not sure exactly where that is, but it doesn't matter. This is obvious to me that this is not the waste facility, and they might tell us this, but once again, unguarded roads just right out of the town, just right out of the neighborhoods, and it appears as if you can just drive down these roads, any one of the multitude of them, and what we have is these little pock marks. Again, same thing, we have the same thing that I just showed you, probably 30 or 40 miles away, and here you have the same thing again. And I am absolutely going to take a trip out here, especially because I can tell that I can access these. Even if there's a gate, I think that I can still access these not far from this neighborhood and just cut through this field. There's many ways to access this. And this is really interesting. To me, this is clearly an older grid under here. And just like we see in Nevada, I think they've gone as far as to name these roads, as if it's going to be future development. But really, really interesting. And there's a bunch of these all over the place. And again, like I was showing in California, these kind of racetrack. This one isn't a complete racetrack. We're missing the top, but really interesting. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a blessed day, and please like, comment, and subscribe.